Welcome to the Parent Advocate Podcast, a show where we celebrate, defend, support, and uplift the voices of the LGBTQIA community. I'm your host, Stephen Chikumba. My pronouns are he, him, and his, and I'm joined by my amazing co-host, Lisette Trujillo.
Hi, Stephen. Lisette here. She, her, Aya. The mission of the Parent Advocate Podcast is to elevate conversations and reframe narratives around trans and non-binary youth to help change hearts and minds. Each week, we bring you our take on all things happening from the perspective of two parents of BIPOC transgender kids.
Lisette, we have a very special guest with us today, a mother of two gender-expansive kids coming to us from across the country on the West Coast.
That's right, Stephen. Today, we have the privilege of speaking with Cora Davidson.
So what are we waiting for? Welcome, everyone, once again to the Parent Advocate Podcast. Let's get started. Lisette. I have been hearing about all of the wonderful celebrations going on, but I want you to update the audience on what's been going on in your week.
Stephen, it's joy. I don't know what to tell you. So for those of you who listen to us, who have been part of Greek life, I was just telling Stephen that it's like I just had homecoming weekend. Literally the best time. Stephen, every 2 blocks, there's like churro hot dog stands all night. They're open 24 hours. You can just get deliciousness. There's fireworks everywhere. There's DJs all over the place. And we ate a lot of paella, which was so much fun, and danced. So that's the joy that's happening right now. I thought what was really interesting, what I learned today, is that they build like these huge figurines. And at first I didn't know what it was. They're usually like political or social commentary of things that they either want to amplify and bring forward, or things that they want to like get rid of in the next year. And it's happening obviously during Lent. So it's kind of like their version of Carnaval. And it's been so much fun. So when we went to go see the figurines that they made, there was one that was about trans rights and trans liberation. There's tons of commentary on Trump and the US right now. And it's around this time every year where I happily get sidetracked by Trans Month of Visibility, because legislative session has felt so heavy. And I know a lot of people are feeling that. So that's been our joy. Daniel's still out and about eating delicious food and having a good time with his friends. Give me an update on you and what you have coming up this week.
So you know what I have coming up this week. You know that this week is the world premiere of The Dads at South by Southwest, and I have been doing interviews, podcasts. It's just been so exciting. Now, there's an embargo until after the actual premiere of the film, but as soon as that hits, you're going to see all types of things, from podcasts to articles that are coming out in different publications where people are talking to us about the film, how we came to make the film, the subject of the film, all things related to the film. So it's really good. Now, I have spent this week picking out my outfits. So I have 7 outfits, a different outfit for each day. Every day is a new look. There will be so much content coming out of South by Southwest. From someone who doesn't really do a lot of content, just as a matter of course, I do some, but not a lot. But my intention is to be very heavily focused on showing you all the drip that I have for South by. So that's one thing, is just preparing for South by Southwest. The other thing, I'm feeling some kind of way about my youngest child. Let me tell you what this fool did. So Thursday and Friday, he didn't go to school. I'm not the kind of parent who's going to make you go to school if you don't feel like going to school, sick or not. I'm just not that dude. You have so many days where you can miss school before they make you make those days up during the summer. You're going to have to do that. So if you're prepared to do that time, I don't care. As long as your academics don't suffer, I'm fine. So this fool decides that he's not trying to go to school on Thursday. I'm like, cool, whatever. Friday, he comes into my room and tells me he can't find his shirt. I'm like, what do you mean you can't find your shirt? Mind you, at the top of his school year, we got him 4 shirts. His school requires them to wear uniforms. And so the uniforms have the actual crest of the institution on them. And so when he said shirt as opposed to shirts, of course, my parent flag went up. I was just like, nigga, what do you mean you can't find your shirt, singular? He's like, oh, I lost the rest of them freshman year. Okay, you are now like 2.5 months shy of finishing your sophomore year in high school. You're telling me you lost 3 of your 4 shirts at the top of your freshman year, like over a year and a half ago. And this is when I'm finding out the day you're not going to school because you can't find a shirt, and the school will send them home if they don't have their uniform on. So I'm feeling some kind of way. And so I find this information out as I walk into his room, which is a hot mess and his dishes everywhere. And I'm feeling some kind of way because I'm like, your room's not clean. You got dishes in your room. You can't find your clothes. Your laundry's undone. Like it's just all the things piled up. And I just unloaded. And I did unload. I'm not like a yeller or a screamer, but I was like ticking off all the ways in which I was not particularly pleased with him in this moment. I'm not one to hold grudges or be upset for very long. I said my piece. I bounced. He didn't go to school. Later that day, I went and I bought him the shirts because I was like, whether you go to Lost and Found or what, I'm going to make sure you have shirts so that next week you're not talking about you can't find a shirt, you can't go to school. So I went and I bought some more shirts, brought him home, gave him the shirts, whatever, cool. Going back to work. Later on that day, he and his brother want to go to like a soccer field. And so I get them in the car and, this kid is sulking. And I'm like, are you upset? And he's like, yes. I'm like, why are you upset? He's like, because I couldn't find my shirts. I was like, dude, that ship has sailed. That's water under the bridge. You were not thinking about those shirts before you told me this morning that you couldn't find your final shirt and were feeling some kind of way about going to school. I was like, you can't be thinking about how upset you are over shirts that you haven't been thinking about for like a year and a half. Like, that's not going to fly. I am not mad. I am not upset. So you don't need to be mad or upset. Like, you made a decision not to go to school because you couldn't go to school. Like, get over it. But I was like, man, if this were an hour day, first and foremost, I'd have caught the whooping of my life. Let's be clear. I'd have gotten the whooping of my life for not going to school, for losing not one, not two, not three, but four shirts. I'd have been lashed severely. And then I'd have had to go to school and like ask the teachers for Lost and Found. I would have been wearing a size small. I'd have been wearing some Lost size small that day at school. And
all day.
Come on.
You know it. Because that would have happened to me too, Stephen. And then I already gave free labor as a kid, like cleaning and stuff. They would have given me more free labor that I would have had to do to pay for it.
Dead ass. So I'm just like, these kids don't know how good they've had it. They like my dad would not have gone to the store on his own to buy that shirt or multiple shirts. I would have literally been stitching a shirt with thread and needle on my own. I would have made that patch on my own. I would have been doing embroidery like dead ass. Like there was no way that what happened with this kid would have happened with me. So that's my little story. Not a lot of excitement, but still some.
But did he tell you, is something going on? Did you scratch the surface?
So, yes, I asked him what was going on, and there's no real thing going on. Like, he is newly turned 16-year-old child. He still doesn't have a lot of his executive function developed. And so, being forgetful and misplacing things, that's par for the course. But for today's situation, I don't think he would have said anything because, like I said, he said he lost his shirts and he can't find them freshman year. Like, why are you now just telling me about 3 shirts you lost freshman year, sophomore year, on the day you lost shirt number 4? Like, that to me is just like typical forgetful boys not really thinking about things too deeply.
Stephen, I spent $300 in chargers over the course of like 2 years. And then I finally was like, next time you lose a charger, because this is how much I've spent in chargers over the course of 2 years, I'm going to make you pay for it. And so all of a sudden, Daniel was like using mine. And I was like, why are you using my charger? He's like, well, I lost it again. Like, these kids have no idea.
I can do you one better. A couple of years ago, got him some AirPods. Wasn't a week before he lost the AirPods. And of course, you got the Find My. And so I see they're in Trenton somewhere, some address, go to the address. Some crazy looking lady answers the door. She's just like, yeah, I don't have a kid. I don't have those AirPods. And I know there's no way this woman who lived in this house in this part of Trenton was at his school, got his AirPods and took them to her house. I feel like some other kid lived in that complex because it was like an apartment building with like 6 units and it didn't accurately locate where they were. It like showed it in the lawn of the place. So that was AirPod pair number 1. I had been gifted a pair because I won some kind of contest and had another pair of AirPods, and I didn't particularly care for AirPods because they don't sit in my ear. So I said, you know what? He lost them. It happens. I gave him my pair. He lost those 2.
No.
He lost those 2. He lost those 2. This past year, like Christmas, he asked for AirPods. He got a 3rd pair. This is like Gen 3, whatever the new AirPods are that are all funky. He got those ones. Yesterday, what did he tell me? He lost one. He didn't lose them both. He lost one. And so he's like, can I get another AirPod? I was like, if you have money, you can get another AirPod because they sell just one. I was like, that's great. If you want to spend your $90 to buy yourself an AirPod, go for it because I'm done. I'm not getting another AirPod. And child, beyond the AirPods, what about the phones? The number of phones and iPads and tablets and Kindles that have broke and cracked screens and just, I'm like, do you children think this stuff is just, it comes from a never-ending well of technology. Like, this is not the way. This
No.
is not the way. And so my lesson is insurance, is the manufacturer's warranty plus insurance, because like I lose my mind the number of times I've had to like take a device to Apple or to T-Mobile or Verizon for a repair or replacement. I can't even tell you. And there's four of them. They said there's four. You only have one, Daniel. I have four kids. Luckily, Ashaming is like, she's an angel with her devices. And Hobbs, he doesn't care. He's probably on the very first iPhone. You know what I'm saying? He doesn't even care about the upgrades. But Lisette, we could talk about the technical suffering that we go through as parent of these kids, or we can get into today's topics.
Let's get into today's topics.
All right, Lisette, the Supreme Court is at it again. This time, they blocked a California law that would have prevented schools from outing trans kids to their parents. Now, I didn't say Tennessee. I didn't say Louisiana. I didn't say Kansas. I didn't say Missouri. I said California, one of the most trans-friendly, trans-protective states in this country.
You know, this case I think is kind of nuanced. I spoke to a lot of advocates who were like, oh, we wish this case itself wouldn't have made it all the way to SCOTUS, because the school made some classic mistakes that are not the norm for schools that are trained in how to support trans LGBTQ youth in their program. But it's also just like a really difficult reminder, a sad reminder, that still so many kids are not supported by their parents, right? So much so that their parents are willing to go all the way to the Supreme Court to ensure that they not be who they are. And it's just really heartbreaking.
This is another lawsuit like the case of Sage Blair that we talked about last week, where parents who don't support their children wield the law like a cudgel and do not understand the ways in which their children are being traumatized by their actions. The fact that your child did not tell you in the first place about how they felt, who they were, how they wanted to be seen and referred to, and chose to tell the school and people at school about their truth speaks volumes about whether or not they trust you. And your behavior, attacking the school, filing a lawsuit, only further traumatizes them and validates the reason you were never told in the first place. And I feel so bad for these children, because imagine having to lie about who you are because your parents are telling you that this is what has to get done. That must be absolutely terrible.
I hope these kids find support outside of their home, because obviously they're not going to get it there. And, you know, I think it's a reminder that there's still so much education that we have to do in order to get parents on board. Parents are their kids' first bullies, and this is a classic case of that. Okay, Stephen, let's talk about Letitia James, the New York Attorney General, who recently ordered major medical centers to resume gender-affirming care for youth in the state. The Attorney General ordered NYU Langone to restart the gender-affirming care program for minors, arguing that the hospital's recent closure of the program, which occurred 2 weeks prior, violated the state non-discrimination laws.
Okay, let's just talk about how badass Letitia James is. Let's just pause here for a moment and talk about the example that she is setting for all states that have anti-discrimination laws on the books and medical centers stopping gender-affirming care for minors in their states in the absence of an actual federal law requiring them to do so. When people bend the knees in states where the law does not require that, and more specifically where the law prevents anti-discrimination, attorney generals in those states should follow the example set by Letitia James. And I loved it. I love it. I love it. I love it. After NYU Langone stopped providing gender affirming care, everyone was like, Mamdani needs to do something. He's the mayor of New York City. He needs to make them reopen. But the mayor does not enforce the law. The attorney general enforces the law. And so the appropriate person stepped in and did the right thing. I want other states' attorney generals to follow this example, because this is the way you protect gender expansive youth in your state.
Stephen, 100% this. Plus, I already know that she did something peak when her face comes across my Instagram feed. This woman has been committed to protecting trans youth and the state of New York through this administration, and I'm in awe.
Yeah, this is not the first time she has been like, yeah, you're not going to fuck around in my state, as the Cheeto head in chief found out when he tried to fuck around in New York. But Lisette, let us not lose sight of the fuckery that still exists. For example, Missouri advanced three, not one, not two, but three anti-trans bills in an overnight session. Aaron in the Morning reported that three bills emerged from Missouri's so-called Emerging Issues Committee in the state's House of Representatives, which all targeted trans people in bathrooms. Beyond regulating where people can be, if these bills are signed into law, they would criminalize individuals for using the restroom, creating civil liabilities for institutions and individuals accused of violating them. It's like, can these people not focus on anything else?
I wish so desperately, Stephen. Like, if I could shave 2 years of my life away, if it ensured that people would be like, bathroom segregation again? That doesn't seem right. I would gladly give 2 years up of my life if people had the common sense to do this, to think in this way. I don't understand how we are in 2026 and we're still talking about bathroom access and the debate around any marginalized group having access to public accommodations as a norm with zero irony to it. I don't have any words other than Jesus, take the wheel, as they say online.
Yeah, I mean, it's even more disturbing because Missouri, like Kansas, is essentially putting out bounties so that you have people who are looking to make money, looking to specifically call people out. And as we've seen so many times before, anytime you have these bathroom bans, anytime you have these bounties on who can or cannot use the bathroom, invariably you have cisgender people caught in the crosshairs. Cisgender people who don't look the way people think they should look when they go into the bathroom are now going to be finding themselves accused of being trans and having to prove that they're not. And imagine that is what you're going to have to be doing when you go to the bathroom, is proving that you're not a transgender person.
This happened in a Tucson Walmart last April, where a cis woman went into a bathroom at Walmart and security followed her in. She was in the stall. They started banging on the stall. They were like, you have to come out. Somebody said that you're trans. And she had to lift her shirt, and be like, I'm a cis woman using the bathroom. And it's just wild to me that people buy into this idea that it's about protecting women and children, and it has nothing to do, because it puts a target on all women when we're entering bathrooms, regardless of whether we're cis or trans.
I know for our listeners, it sounds like a broken record. I know that they listen to our episodes and they think, didn't they just say this the last episode or the episode before that or the episode before that? And we apologize. We don't want to sound like broken records. We just can't help but reinforce the fact that this fuckery abounds everywhere. It's one state after the next, doing the same tired thing, causing us to repeat the same tired responses, because it's true. We can't help but explain over and over again that by targeting trans people, you are actually creating harm for everybody. And the more we say it, hopefully, much like the misinformation and disinformation we hear from the right, maybe the more we say it, the more people will start to hear it and understand it and apply it to their lives.
And there is no rational discrimination. And I feel like that's what they're always like, what the opposition is always like, but this is rational. And you're like, no, discrimination of any kind is not rational. If you can't see that, you have to do some insight work.
I just watched an interview with Katie Couric and Gavin Newsom, and she was basically asking him, like, don't you think by suggesting that Democrats stop talking about trans people and focus on what most Americans want to focus on, that you're actually throwing trans people on the bus? And this fool talks about, I'm the most pro-trans governor in history. I've signed the most pro-trans legislation ever, period, full stop. But last year, 2 trans athletes won in these track meets, and that's not fair. And I'm like, you sound fucking stupid. How many races are run every single year at the, elementary school level? level, at the high school level, at the collegiate level, in California. Fuck all the other states, just in California. So you're suggesting that the fact that a trans athlete won a race 2 years in a row, suddenly the deck is stacked against cisgender athletes. And you are sitting here suggesting that we can have a common sense conversation about trans athletes when one race won 2 years in a row by a trans person is the evidence you use to support it, when there's ample evidence. We just talked about it last week about the 52 studies which showed that there is no material physical advantages between cisgender and transgender athletes, and that trans women have no physical advantages after just a year of hormone therapy. So how are you going to say it's just common sense when the scientists are saying that there is no scientific basis for it, and you are going to sit here and hold up your record of supporting trans people as if that negates the harm that you're currently doing? Like, sit the fuck down and shut the fuck up.
I also, for our listeners, I just Googled this again. I mean, I have links saved, but I was not at home a while ago. And my Signal chat was popping off because some of the parents are meeting with someone who's running for an elected seat in our area and is still like pushing back on, they're a Democrat pushing back on trans youth in sports. And they were like, what can we give him? And I sent this old article from 2018 called Trump's Political Wedge Issue That Is Dividing the Nation, right? You can Google it. And essentially this article talks about how in 2018, when it was still like 40 bills, right, that had been filed in the 40 plus states that they were filed in. But essentially in Kentucky, they did message testing and they spent $32,000 in message testing around trans youth in sports and trans youth and gender affirming care. And they message tested it only to see if they would gain votes because they knew that the majority of people did not know transgender people. And so when people talk about trans youth in sports and trans youth having access to gender affirming care, the only thing you are telling me is a marketed rhetoric that you have ingested. And that's why, I think that's why we are like, oh God, we sound like a broken record, because they are not individual or authentic thoughts. They have been marketed, most of society has been marketed to heavily for the last, 2018, 7-8 years to believe this bullshit. And so I really wish that people could see that this is a manufactured issue to deflect from the real ones that we should be focusing on.
So truly said. But you know what? I want to talk to this mom and see what she has to say about some of these issues. So how about we get to today's guest?
Let's do it, Stephen.
Cora Davidson is a dedicated professional and parent advocate based on the Pacific Coast. With over 20 years experience in community engagement, fundraising, and communications, Cora currently serves as a project manager for the state's affordable housing programs. Beyond her professional resume, Cora brings a wealth of lived experience to our conversation. A proud Irish-Italian, queer, and neurodivergent advocate, she has spent the last 26 years building a life with her partner and their two gender-expansive teenagers. Whether she's navigating the complexities of state-level project management or simply grabbing a boba and watching comedy sketches with her kids, Cora approaches advocacy with a blend of deep expertise and self-described anxious, awkward authenticity. Everyone, please welcome Cora Davidson to our show.
Welcome to this episode of the Parent Advocate Podcast, Cora Davidson. We're so excited to have you today.
Oh, thank you so much. It's such an honor. And as I've mentioned to Stephen, this is a dream of mine coming true. I am a longtime podcast listener, but I've never been part of the conversation.
Cora, as Stephen mentioned in your intro, you are raising two gender expansive teenagers. To start us off, could you share the story of when you first began to understand that your children were on a journey with their gender identities?
I think, honestly, since before they were born. When I found out I was pregnant, our first child was very much planned. I didn't want to know the gender. I was like, this is one surprise in life that I think I can handle. But my husband really wanted to know. He felt like it was a way to connect with the baby. So we did find out. But I was really conscious, because it was a girl, to be aware of what gender stereotypes were being placed upon her, particularly because we were living in a very small town of about 6,000 people. We were getting a lot of donations negotiations of baby clothes for girls, so much to the point like I could not justify buying a lot of gender nonconforming clothes for this child. I did when I could try to kind of just give them gender neutral clothing or introduce boy clothing and kind of let them choose. But at a very young age, they chose princess dresses and crowns. Like they literally wore crowns every day. And so I was like, okay, fine, I'm not getting my tomboys. That's okay. We'll just see what happens. And I'm not a hair person. I can't do hair. So I told my kids either let me brush it or we get it cut real short and it's not a problem. So that's what they did. They chose to do that. So for a long time, they had really short hair and then they wear their princess dresses and crowns. That became more noticeable when we moved to Olympia, Washington. So a bigger city than the one we were living in. It's a safe haven for LGBTQ people, trans people, immigrants. And so there it was much more open. That's when I began to understand like how other people were seeing my kids and some assumptions they were making about them. My oldest did go through a tomboy phase and very much had the short hair and wore a lot of masculine clothing, but was bothered when they would be misgendered. So they had asked me to kind of call it out and correct the person who had misgendered them. So, that was a negotiation we had, and I made sure I wasn't, overstepping my own boundaries with them. I think it was in the time of COVID, where time never made sense. My oldest came out as non-binary, and I was like, okay, they like she, they pronouns. They wanted to stick with their name. I felt like maybe, I'll be honest, I thought maybe it was a phase because we were reading a lot of books about non-binary folk and kind of getting more introduced to that. But again, just kind of let them lead. When we moved to a smaller town about 3 years ago, it was a rougher time for him. He'd had some issues in elementary school, middle school was going okay, but when we went to this new middle school, things got intense and he was being bullied over his beliefs that there was something beyond the gender binary. He at the time was identifying as agender, no gender. So we just supported that. We pulled him out of school per his wishes and we homeschooled for a year. Some learning happened, but we were also, trying to run our own business at the time and it was a lot. But then he eventually wound up after about a year going back to school and that went really well. And last summer he came out to us, said he was trans. He felt like he wasn't an imposter anymore. He felt like he could say it. From there, we're just like, okay, let him lead, show us the way. He's educated us a lot. They both have. We do live in a very small community. It's about 11,000 people, but there are actually a lot of trans and queer people here that we have had the good fortune of tapping into the established community here. And people have been very embracive and
you shared a lot, and
yeah.
many parts of your story actually like resonated deeply with me. First, that whole what are you having? My wife didn't want to know. I thought the more practical thing was to know. And with Hobbs in particular, I knew she didn't know. And the whole time during her pregnancy, I would tell her, oh, he's a boy or he's a girl. I would just mess her up. And she was like, is it really? Really? The entire time I'm thinking back to like the games I was playing, not recognizing I was actually prescient. I actually knew something I didn't know at the time it was happening. But you also talked about that sense of being okay with it, sensing maybe they were going through a phase, but also being okay when they ultimately shared with you who they were. And it's interesting because oftentimes we have a gut sense of who our children are, even though we don't necessarily always follow our gut. Did you ever have a sense for either of your children that you knew something was different? And I say different than what you presumed you thought or what you presumed the sex assignment at birth was before they revealed who they were to you? Or was it just something that you took in stride, but you didn't have any real foreknowledge of what was happening?
So yes, actually I did. And they must have been 2 or 3. I remember this. It's still very vivid for me. I was randomly in the bathroom and I had the thought, I'm like, I'm supposed to have a son. And at the time it didn't make any sense. Like I had girly girls. I was like, maybe it's my male cat. Maybe it's my husband's cousin was living with us at the time. And so I thought maybe it's him. And then when my son came out, I was like, oh, there you go. That was it. I knew. I just didn't understand what I knew. Our son, he was the baby that was not planned. He's a surprise. He's very much aware of that. He has been always bringing us surprises. And so, yeah, I guess that also it didn't surprise me then.
It's so funny
Yeah.
that you bring up sort of babies and the way we prepare for them. My youngest
Yeah.
sister her and her wife are having twins. And so they had a gender neutral baby shower and they were very intentional, like everything from the invitations, all of that. It wasn't like, it's a boy, it's a girl, like that kind of, it was called Cielito
Mm.
Lindo, and which is like, lovely sky. And the colors were brown and white and very like gender neutral. And my mom had these specialty cookies made. And I guess the cookie maker asked her if they knew the sex. And my mom said, oh, they're doing a gender neutral. No, no, they don't. It's a surprise. That's what she said. No, they don't. It's a surprise. And so my mom walked in with a box of cookies that were blue and pink. And my sister was like, you failed the assignment, but no one got mad. But my mom was like, if Lisette were here, she would tell me that this is not gender neutral. So you've been with your partner for 26 years, which is a beautiful foundation to build a family on. How did the two of you navigate these conversations, and how did you ensure that the both of you were on the same page with your kids?
I think part of it is that's the work we've been doing our whole marriage is to be on the same page. And especially with our kids, that we were very intentional going into being parents, that we were very much equal. I don't equal partners, but we're very much partners. That was an intentional for me, even just choosing him as my partner. The conversations we had were really easy. It was more like, who are we going to tell? Where does the safety lie? But a lot of this has been work. We're white. I grew up in white segregation and didn't come to that realization until I was in my 40s, in pretty much 2016. It was also doing work around that and having conversations and exploring as a family those different topics. Living in Olympia, we had a lot of resources. Stephen, I emailed you about Talcott Broadhead. I know that person, and they wrote a great book called Polka Dot about transgender kids. So it's just been steady work. I just want to say, I think it really kicked into high gear with COVID because I really started to feel that I fully trust my spouse. We'd gone through some pretty hard times with my mental health issues, but that we could fully trust each other. And I think since then, things like that come up like this, we're able to also support each other and help each other process and not also put that on our kids.
You say something that I want to lean into because family dynamics can be really complex. I've shared on this podcast and in my parent group about how initially my mother was not supportive. My brother is still not supportive, and how we're estranged as a result of it. Family dynamics, community dynamics, school dynamics can be really complex. How did you and your family navigate some of the complexities of these interpersonal dynamics and relationships as you kind of learned who your children were and learned how to support and affirm them beyond the home?
So again, just a lot of groundwork with people. So Tim's, my son, asked that I help him come out to people. So I took on telling my parents. They are more conservative. I figured they would be supportive, but I wrote them a letter and pretty much stated, this is how it is. If you're going to be involved in our lives, you're going to use the new name, you're going to use the new pronouns, you're going to respect that. And I'm like, if you want to have conversations, you'll have them with me. Also, here's this great book called Beyond the Gender Binary with Via Locke. This is how it's going to be. And I've had to do that with my parents before. Just they take it better in writing. I process better in writing. Beyond them, like my husband's parents, no issue. They're a little more conservative and Catholic, but they're still, yeah, that was easy. And our friend group, very easy. So we also have other trans family members who've kind of led the way for a lot of people and made that a lot easier. And I've been open at work about it. Where we live in the Pacific Northwest is very affirming right now. And our state government's very much behind us. And so we're very fortunate that this is an easy process.
I love that you talk about supporting and doing some of the coming out, because I think a lot of times parents here let them lead, and the assumption is that your kids have to do all of it. You know what I mean? And that's terrifying to them, right? I also think our kids sometimes don't know what they don't know. We might not prepare them for that negative outcome as parents. And so, like, for the parents who are listening, who are trying to help their children navigate, what were some of Tim's apprehensions in communicating to you, I need your help with this? And like, what were ways you all prepared that you feel might be helpful to our listeners?
So he asked for help because he was not ready to have those conversations. So I think for him, he was still working things out, right? And his coming out was slow even to his own family. So it took him time to even be able to say it and then to tell us his new name. And when I looked at it, I did most of my communication in writing because that's where I'm most comfortable. I like to be able to edit my words. So that's what I laid into and was like trying to craft a message also to the audience, right? And how much, with a lot of my friends, it was just basic info. They just needed to know new name, pronouns. We're excited that was it.
What advice would you have for parents navigating, helping their kids share that information in the way that you very intentionally and in a very considerate fashion went about doing that? Because it's pretty difficult sometimes for parents to find the right way and the right path to share what is often difficult information. It's not difficult because the information itself is difficult. It's just how do you share it with, I have conservative parents, I have religious parents, I have parents from different cultures. What tips
Mhm.
or advice would you
Yeah.
give parents who help navigate their children coming out?
And also, I think it's so
Mhm.
important that you highlighted that their coming out process took time because our social transition took 15 months. Like slowly telling family, right? I think people think that it happens like from one day to the next, but it doesn't. It's a process of understanding
Mhm.
themselves and how you're gonna support as a family.
Well, another thing I did is where I work, I'm very fortunate we have an LGBTQ plus employee group. So I reached out to them and asked for advice. I was also writing an article at the same time, coincidentally on coming out day. So I was asking for advice on that article, but also like, how do I support my son? And I definitely felt a little judgment when I said that I was going to be coming out for him. And even after I explained that that's what he was telling me to do, but I shrugged it off because I was like, this is my kid. I know my kid. And I got good advice. I think a lot of it is just also giving yourself time to formulate your message. And it was driving me crazy because the books that I ordered, the lookbooks didn't show up. They weren't showing up. So I couldn't tell my parents. I mean, I finally did just email my mom because she wanted to talk to me. And so before I get on the phone with her, I was like, did you see my email? And it had been a couple days after I'd sent it. And she's like, yeah. And what? I need to say something to it about that? Like, yeah, it's fine. Thanks for leaving me hanging for 2 days, not knowing what your silence was all about.
That's so funny because people don't recognize how much anxiety we have as parents going through this. They just think it's just run of the mill, everyday pedestrian stuff. And it's not, it's stress inducing. Like the fear of that first time of saying the words, our kids live with that until they shared their identity with us. And now we, in turn, kind of live with that until we share that information with our kids' permission with the larger world. And every time, and I've talked to so many dads who talk about that first occasion when they've run into somebody they haven't seen for years, who may have known their children as their, sex assignment at birth and have never met this new person, have never seen this person, but no, like I've only got one kid or I only have two kids and I'm seeing these two kids and they don't look anything like the kids that I knew. And now
Yeah.
you're trying to explain it. That kind of discomfort, and many of us get over it, but it's still that every time it's a case of first impression because it's a new time. And I think about how always they talk about people having to share their identity with the larger world, that coming out experience, and how every single time it's problematic, not problematic, but it's a challenge. And so it's funny
Mhm.
listening to you talk about your mother being like, yeah, I got it. And like, no, that's not what I was looking for. I was looking for some
Yeah.
affirmative acknowledgement of what was happening and not this passive, like, yeah, I got it. So I totally understand and appreciate where you're coming from. But I digress. I actually wanted to ask you because your formal job, because you raised it, involves affordable housing, helping people
Mhm.
secure affordable housing. And there is a direct connection between like the rights for people to have access to affordable housing and the right of LGBTQ plus people to have access to anything and everything. Where do you see that overlap and how do you feel that your work has prepared you to advocate on behalf of your child?
Yeah, I try to look at it very multifaceted in my work. So I'm very fortunate to work for a state agency that is very invested in racial equity and really centering the heart of our work, the most vulnerable in our state, and look at that from a statewide perspective. So my actual day job and the work that I do with contractors, I have to follow state law. And we're very fortunate that state law still says that LGBTQ and trans people are protected. So that's kind of a given. But I can't say, hey, contractor who's designing all these units, what do you think about having a recovery center and they want to split it into a men's dorm and a women's dorm, right? But I can't say, why don't we put in maybe like a gender neutral area, right? Or something like that. So Thankfully, because of where I work, I have a background for my team's meeting that has the trans flag, and it's also got our state, the logo on there. So I have that up in every meeting. So in one way or the other people are reminded or I'm reminded to keep those most vulnerable in the focus. It can be difficult sometimes, definitely, but it's worth the fight. And having that community to call on and support each other has just been amazing.
Where do you see the most gaps when we talk about like affordable housing and access coming from? Like if you had like a magic wand to fix things, what would those things be?
I think getting away from traditional housing models, I think we really restrict ourselves a lot with that. Federal funding is incredibly problematic. We're very lucky that our state legislature is really understanding the need and we have some strong goals. We need to get some of the bureaucracy out of the way. I mean, there's a lot of internal bureaucracy that I get frustrated with that is really in the way. People have to understand it's a multifaceted solution. So we do need zoning to change. We need prices to come down to build. We need to accept other ways of building and living. There's a lot that goes into that. I think our biggest problem in this state, at least, is having the person power to get the actual houses built and online.
So
I mean, you have like 20 years experience in like grant writing, fundraising, community engagement. You're no stranger to getting things done. And so, like, how did your professional toolkit, tool belt, as I like to call it, help you advocate for your kids in like school and healthcare settings? Because we bring so much of ourselves into those advocacy spaces.
I think I really benefited from being an only child, and I was the only child who was taken everywhere. I was a very well-behaved kid, so I got to go everywhere, and my parents encouraged me to talk to other adults. That, I think, has been the biggest thing. So I've just kind of grown up assuming I can talk to people in power and say things. Also, I felt like I was a special white princess. So of course people wanted to hear what I had to say. So, well, when that bubble burst, it was a very rough reentry into the world. It did give me a level of confidence that I still call on today. I love stories, and communication has always been very central to me.
what I wanted to say, why
Yeah,
I
yeah.
was like giggling was Daniel, Lisette and Jose's son, is very much you in that he has been around adults his entire life. He has been taken by these two everywhere. And so, because of that, he's very comfortable talking with people of all backgrounds, all races, religions, political stripes, leanings, because he's been in all of these settings. And so, that typical fear that accompanies children addressing adults isn't really present with him. That intimidation that sometimes accompanies people of a certain stature when you know this is the president or the governor or the whoever, it's not really a thing because you're just another person. And so I was giggling at the fact that, you took it as a source of pride being an only child and being able to be in all these spaces. And I'm thinking about Daniel and the way he's been raised. And he's just an amazing advocate for himself and for other LGBTQ plus people. I think in large part, and don't get a big head, Lizette, over it, because his parents were intentional in bringing him places and introducing him to people and making sure that he was seen, not just for his gender identity, for his personhood. He was seen and that he could form perspectives and opinions and engage because he was in those spaces. And his parents were very intentional about putting him in these spaces. And I don't mean to talk for you, Lisette, but I'm talking for you and your husband in this moment because I do think it's so important that children are not only polite, thank you, Cora, for your parents raising you properly, but also engage their children so that their children know how to advocate for themselves and have agency in spaces where oftentimes youth shrink.
hmm And two, I went to an all women's college. So that is another space in which that is very much encouraged. So I had a lot of good training. And then I realized very early on with my oldest child, when she was like 6 months old, that she has a whole nother life because she was going to daycare. I was like, she has a whole nother life without me. And so I think I always knew she was her own person. My mom did not get that memo until much, much later with me, which caused me my own problems. That's something too that used to irk me. My mother-in-law, love and adore, but she would often try to like label the kids. And I was always like, no, don't that. It's not just who they are. Please see them more fully.
I love that you talk about that they had their own life because Jose and I talked about this when Daniel went into kindergarten. We were like, oh my God, he's having a whole life without us. Like, there's a whole day when he comes home, he gets to tell us what that was like. And I don't know how he didn't understand this, but like the first week of kindergarten, we were like, have you made friends? And he was like, no. And we were like, oh God, he's not making friends. Like it was like 4 days in. And we were like, well, like do you have people you talk to? Like people you sit with? Like people you play at recess with? And he was like, oh yeah. Yeah, I've got that. And I was like, well, those are friends. And Daniel was like, oh, well, then, yeah, I guess I have friends, right? But like, it's interesting to think about the ways in which they are experiencing their world. And oftentimes, as parents, we're so busy that it's easier to make the assumptions about who they are and what they need, as opposed to like truly engaging them and learning about what's happening in their day-to-day lives. I think that's why I love having this podcast, but also having this dialogue with Stephen, because Stephen's always curious. He's like, I want to know about your day. And I'm curious too. I want to know my child. And I think what's really beautiful that having a gender diverse child allows you is you get to meet them. If you allow yourself, you get to meet them fully, because they have to be vulnerable in order to ask for their needs to be met, right? Like they have to be willing to disclose their inner world in a way that a lot of times teens don't have to with their kids, with their parents, sorry. And so I'm curious, like for parents listening, what were some of the surprise joys, right? Of like getting to meet your kids where they were in their gender journey. And I find that we learn a lot from our kids. What were some of the things you learned as well?
Well, one thing I did realize when they were young that I needed to be open with them about my journey and honest about who I was. So if I was going to ask them to do that with me, I had to do that I had to model it for them, really. Like no one else was going to teach them that. So that has been hugely rewarding for me. It's really encouraged me to get correct diagnoses for my mental health, get correct treatment, get that's been huge, and being able to identify when I'm having episodes and having that response be love and kindness. It also made me really own my queerness. That's been complicated. And because I entered into my relationship with my spouse, the person who I want to be with for hopefully forever, I was like, what does it matter? Like I just look straight. And so, but I realized like if I want my kids to be able to explore that, I have to share with them that yeah, it's complicated and it does look different and it's okay. So that's been the real gift for me. I think what's lovely about my children is that they're both teens. They both want to spend time with us, like one-on-one, together. We're planning for the future and what we want to move and where we want to move. So that's been the real joy. I'm their friend, but not in that inappropriate parent way. But we genuinely have interests. Tim's is my art mentor. He gets me to do art stories and drawing, and that's the beautiful thing, that we're getting to know each other as full people. Because my parents don't know me as a full person, but my kids do.
This is an interesting conversation for so many reasons. And I have so many thoughts going through my head. And the first one was about like knowing our kids as whole people and recognizing that they are independent from us. So much of what we as parents often do is we project a future for our children as opposed to accepting who our children are and going along with them during that journey of revelation of who they are going to become, who they are ultimately going to reveal themselves to be, as opposed to presuming we know who they are, presuming that we know what path we're going to chart, being like helicopters over them and not giving them that agency and autonomy they need to thrive and flourish as whoever they're going to be. Like, so that's the first thought. And then the second thought is that concept of your children as friends, not in that, as you said, inappropriate way where you are like besties smoking blunts together and drinking 40s, but you are able to have honest and open conversations with one another that shatters that parent-child kind of wall that often exists between parents and children because we perceive ourselves as supposed to be authoritarian and very rigid and straight, and they can't see us as soft and vulnerable and flawed, which we are. Our kids have never been our kids before, and we've never been their parents before. So why is this need to be perfect the thing that we hold on to, and why do we have these barriers that are artificial? I'm Nigerian American. My parents raised me according to how they were raised in another on another continent, another country at a different time with different cultural norms and values than the ones they raised me with here. Once I left 68 Race Street and went into the world, there was no more Nigeria. It was America and American culture and American values. And I was raised essentially, that's why I said a Nigerian American, because I was raised essentially as an American, not by them, but by America. And so it's really important that we acknowledge that our kids are living in vastly different times than we are and give them space to be those people and learn from them what that experience is. I love talking to my children. I love talking to my children because they introduce us to so much stuff that we would otherwise not know. In my,
Yeah.
55-year-old self moving through the world, it's not their lives, it's not their experience. And so I really love that you introduced that. And this, I love that this whole episode is going in a different direction. Like these are not the questions we had written down for you. And I really appreciate that it's going a different direction. So for the people who don't know, CD is her Substack handle. And CD started following me on Substack and subscribed, and we just started having this back and forth conversation. And I was just like, who are you? Let's talk. Met her, and I was like, oh, you have to come onto our podcast. Had no idea that Lisette was also a part of CD's world. And so her being on our show stemmed primarily because we started having these conversations on Substack about what it is to parent gender expansive children in a time in a world that is increasingly hostile to our children and the things that we as a community need to do to support one another. So I'm curious to know, because our start was very much in this realm of protecting our children from the powers that be. How do you see federal legislation, executive orders, state laws that are increasingly hostile to our children? How do you see this impacting the way you're raising your children, if at all, and what we as a community need to do to really like circle the wagons to protect our children?
Yeah, it's heavy. So for me, this is the first time I am personally identifying with a marginalized group. I've had the fortune, as I mentioned, being very white. So this is new for me, but I realized thankfully I have been doing my homework, and so I know it's not new for the world, which is I love to remind my children we're not alone. We've definitely made some plans in case this country becomes where we feel not safe enough. But right now, our state is incredible. So I will give a shout out to that. It's really cool that I get to go every day and support that entity who is protecting my family. And I get regular press releases about the work that they're doing for that. But it's been hard, and it's been something we have to be thoughtful, like how do we talk to our kids about this? How do we not terrify them, but how do we also kind of indicate to them that we're going to try to keep you as safe as possible? It's so hard too because nobody asks about it. Nobody asks how hard this has been and this change. And I mean, that's why I glommed onto you both. Like they get it and they can help light the way. I've been going back and listening to your library of podcasts, and it's like a little trail for me to follow. And as I've mentioned, I'm OCD, and so I also love something that I can fixate on. And your guys' is very a healthy fixation, right? You give me good information, help me feel joy, help me feel the righteous anger. Thank you.
You're talking about something really important though too, because when I first started working and supporting families, I remember sitting down with Ellen Kahn, actually Stephen, who you know, and saying, look, when I talk to families, 94% of them tell me they're afraid. The initial, like when you scratch the surface, it's like, I'm afraid because of my child's trans identity does A, B, and C. And I was like, how do we reframe? Really what you're afraid of is like, it's overwhelming to think about how you're going to access resources. It's overwhelming future thinking. Are they going to be safe? And granted, at the time when I was having this conversation, you're talking like 6-7 years ago. So we were in a different political landscape and we saw hope moving forward. For me, the foundation of doing this work was if we could pave a way forward, which you've mentioned this too, if we could pave a way forward that parents could follow, that we reduce that fear, right? And so I'm curious to know, because you are reabsorbing, engaging in parenting resources, what are like your top 3 things that you think, if you were talking to other parents and also maybe other institutions, that you think are key in helping parents feel like, I've got this. I can do this in manageable chunks. We can support our kids with ease, even in the midst of political chaos. What do you think those 3 things would be?
Ooh, believing in yourself as a parent, I think first and foremost, and that really got to trust yourself. You know what you don't know, and you know that you need help, but you trust yourself. So that's been a big thing for me. I've been doing therapy around this. So if you're able to get therapy around this and get help, my OCD therapy was enormously helpful because I ruminate, so I get caught in spirals. And when I started my OCD therapy, the Trump administration speaking about trans people was very triggering. Like I had to ease into this. So part of that too is understanding that I had my own work to do. I think also it's good to remember your boundaries. My son doesn't know my fears for him. He knows ones that I think are very relevant to his daily life, but those are few right now, thankfully. And so otherwise, I just refuse. I'm like, you don't have to know that. I also try to look at different ways to weave transness into my life, be it the podcast, shows, books, and looking for different sources where there's trans identity, but it's not the focus, and where it is more part of my everyday life. And so it isn't something necessarily to be fear. We're celebrating it more, and that's what we lead with.
I love this. I know I've said it before during this episode, but I really do. I love the way it's making me think about things I hadn't traditionally thought about. Like I haven't thought about the few number of my friends that have checked in on me. Like there's so much fucked up shit happening in this world. There's so much anti-trans shit being like forced down the country's throat that I haven't reflected on the few number of my friends that have checked in on me who know what our family is going through. Yeah, that's a thing that people don't really appreciate. Everybody's got shit going on. Like, let's just be clear. Everybody's got shit going on. In the same breath, I'm talking about my friends not checking in on me. How often am I checking in on my friends?
Yes. Yeah.
It goes both ways, but at the same time, like only one of us is dealing with this. Selfishly, I put the onus on other people to check in on the ones who are dealing with stuff. It's like after my wife passed
Yeah.
away, like I can count on one hand the number of people that checked in on me after Chanel passed away. And whatever. Again, people have their own lives to lead. Like this is not their tragedy. This is mine. And so, yeah, my expectations perhaps they were a bit blown out of proportion because of my grief. But at the same time, are they? Because I'm thinking to myself, I have a friend who just lost his wife, and I know how often I check in on him, whether it's a call or a text message or just, making sure my sons are checking in on his kids. Like I know the intentionality behind that behavior because I know what it is to lose a spouse suddenly and then to be left with all that follows in the wake of losing the mother of your children. And so I think very much about us in our situation and the difficulty. I'm in a blue state, you're in a blue state. We don't necessarily have like that assault in our state, but the assault is occurring nonetheless. And so I think it's important to remind people that, hey, yeah, it would be great every once in a while if you checked on the people, if you truly care about them, because things are difficult. Even if they're not saying anything, even if they're not raising their hand to say, hey, I need help, it's a nice thing to do, notwithstanding. There's no question, just a thought.
I'm petty as fuck. So like I have an inventory. And I know this is a really important topic because I wrote about this on Substack and I had a lot of parents actually tell me like you are speaking to this thing that I'm experiencing. Like we're in the middle, another year of an onslaught of anti-trans policy hitting our states, right? Everyone's acting like they don't know what's going on, but you can hear the rhetoric loudly on every media outlet, right? I think about this moment. There was these 2 weeks years ago where Jose was having an art opening a few weeks before or after I was giving my very first talk, a storytelling talk, and speaking with a panel of educators. All of my friends from that time went to his art opening and only 2 of them actually came to this event where I was sharing our story and talking about the importance of allyship. And it was in that moment that I understood, right? That they were making active decisions for how they were going to show up in my life. And that's very painful for parents. That's a significant loss when you begin to navigate this as an affirming parent. And I think that story doesn't get told a lot about how this becomes a point in your life where you are affirming and doing the right thing by your child and you are experiencing bias and discrimination in that way. And so I'm glad that you're both naming that in this moment. And I hope that people listening will know that they aren't alone and that it's just such a part of this journey, unfortunately. And then we meet our chosen family, our chosen people, and our lives become fools. We're not fools, but our life becomes full in these really beautiful and unexpected ways. Two, not a question, just a statement.
I do have some parents of trans kids that I could be better at reaching out to. Just want to add that caveat to you, Amanda. Sorry. And shout out to Joan Navajo Kane. She's a poet and a parent of a trans child.
All right, we went heavy and we went deep, but I want us to bring us out of that heaviness and I want us to end on something super joyful. So, if you could share one joyful moment of trans joy, of non-binary joy that you had with your children that when you think of lights you up on the inside, what would it be? And you could pick one for each just so that they don't feel like, Mom, why didn't you say something about me? What would that moment be?
Well, this last week we got to go, my son and I went to our LGBTQ community group meeting, and he shared the length of time he has been on hormones. And the room erupted in applause and joy. That was really cool. He was very proud. The other one will be my friend Amanda. Her youngest child was starring in a play, and we kind of showed up and surprised him. He didn't know we were coming to the performance. And just seeing him look around the room after the show and realize how many of us were there for him. Yeah, it was just so beautiful.
So, Cora, it has been an absolute joy having you on today. I'm so glad that Substack brought us together, and I'm looking to so many more shared stories and experiences with you in the future, as well as getting hubby to join us at our next retreat, whenever, wherever, like no pressure, but we're going to work on him. But I hope you have an amazing rest of your day, and I am so looking forward to getting this episode out to the world.
Thank you both so much. This has been amazing. I'm going to float all day.
Now it's time for our recurring segment, Allies and Assholes, where we highlight individuals and groups who are supporting the LGBTQIA community on the one hand and call out straight up assholes who are trying to move us all backwards on the other. Lisette, who are we talking about today?
Well, Stephen, our ally of the week is none other than Lyft. Last week, we reported that Kansas invalidated the licenses and birth certificates of transgender residents in the state, forcing them to obtain new licenses and new birth certificates with their sex assigned at birth. But in a sign of true allyship, the rideshare company posted on social media that they were offering discounted rides for their trans and non-binary travelers. By using the code TRANSJOY, riders could get 50% off of their rides in the week immediately following the implementation of the Kansas law, since so many of them were scared to get in their cars and actually drive to their motor vehicle divisions and or vital records offices.
Okay, I'm just going to say this for the record. I love me some Lyft. Ever since I learned that Lyft would donate a percentage of your ride to organizations like the Human Rights Campaign and ACLU, I have been taking Lyfts. And ever since Lyft was very intentional about not supporting people like Trump, I was like, I fucks with Lyft. And now I have yet another reason to support them because of their response in the moment to a vulnerable community who found themselves with the very difficult decision of continuing to drive without a license and potentially being pulled over, arrested, and thrown into jail with the wrong sex. That to me was a frightening scenario, but it's like, you got to get to work. You got to go to the DMV. You got to get to the state house to go to vital records to change your documents. Like, all these things required you having a means of transportation. I love the fact that Lyft recognized the harm that was befalling gender expansive people and took steps to protect them. So I get it and I love it.
And this is why Lyft is our ally of the week.
Congratulations to Lyft. And now on to our asshole of the week. Our asshole of the week goes to Joe Rogan. He said, I was so mad when I heard about this podcast with Joe Rogan. He had Steve O from Jackass on his show, and Steve O was telling Joe Rogan about how he had decided against doing a gag, essentially, where he was going to get breast implants. And he did so because he had gone to a store and the cashier that helped bring him out was trans. And the cashier told him how difficult life was for trans people, trans women in particular. And as a result, Steve O felt real compassion for her and realized that that gag wouldn't be funny. In response, Joe Rogan launched into a full-blown attack on trans women, accusing them of being perverted men simply trying to get their jollies by lurking in the women's bathroom. He went on to further suggest that trans women suffer from autogynephilia, a term used to describe a male's sexual arousal at the thought of being female. Autogynephilia is not a formal psychological condition within the medical health community, and many professionals actually criticize it for pathologizing trans identities and wholly lacking of scientific support.
I'm so mad. And I don't understand why more people do not boycott this fucking show that promotes pseudoscience and conspiracy theories. We've had real politicians like Bernie Sanders go on this podcast as if this person has valuable things to say. And it's really scary to think about the hundreds of millions, not just millions, like hundreds of millions of followers and listeners that his podcast has across the globe.
The problem for me is that when a person who knows nothing but has a huge platform says something, people believe him. He's like the podcast version of Elon Musk, an absolute abject idiot who is as smart as a rock, but has a big voice and says what he thinks, as if what you think has any more value than people who actually know what they're talking about. And unfortunately, in this instance, Steve-O, who I think did the most admirable thing possible, which is planned on doing something that he thought was funny to lampoon a marginalized community, met a member of that community and actually rethought that decision and had compassion after speaking to this person because he realized how difficult it was. And instead of Joe Rogan being like, damn, if Steve-O can be convinced by talking to a trans person and hearing the true hardship that they experience, maybe I should change my stance. But no, he's gonna fucking pull up some made up psychological condition to talk about some marginal experience from some perverted subgroup of men, okay? Stop equating trans women to men. Stop doing that. Trans women are not perverts. Trans women don't have a desire to lurk in women's spaces for the purposes of getting their jollies off. That's white men. That's cisgender white men, period. They're not the same thing. And for you to equate them as the same thing and using your platform, now hundreds of millions of people are going to hear you, hear your stupid thoughts, and think that they're real. And this is why Joe Rogan is our asshole of the week. Well, that's our show for today, folks. I'd like to thank today's guest, Corey Davidson, for joining us today. And I got to give it up to my co-host, Lisette Trujillo, for keeping me sane when it feels like the world is falling apart.
And Stephen, I just love getting to catch up with you every week about all the craziness happening in our lives, like lost school uniforms and chargers, but also getting to talk about the things that we really care about, which is the liberation of trans youth globally and in our homes. And so we couldn't do this without you and your commitment to our community. And obviously we couldn't do this without you, our listeners. So thank you for tuning in to the Parent Advocate Podcast.
And folks, please be sure to subscribe to our Substack, podcast, and YouTube channel. Follow us on Instagram and my TikTok, and do everything you've got to do to stay up to date with everything going on here at the Parent Advocate Podcast. Goodbye.